Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to wait one more minute, let folks log on here. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Michael Segala here. This is the San Joaquin Valley REAP program, Regional Early Action Planning Program, funded by State HCD. This is our now every other month webinar that we do. Today's webinar is on the San Joaquin Valley Guide to Recent California Housing Laws. We have a full slate of panelists today from across California. I think we have San Diego, LA, Stockton, Oakland, and Fresno covered. So good group of people here today. Hopefully you find it informative. A few house rules before we get started. First, and most important, I'd like to introduce Robert Phipps, Deputy Director of Fresno COG. He's also the co-chair here of the REAP planning efforts for the Valley, along with myself. And then we have Randy Hatch. Randy, you want to introduce yourself? He's our ongoing, as you've seen him before, panelist and local land use expert in the Valley here. I'll introduce the other panelists in a second. Let me just get through some more housekeeping items. One is, if you have any questions, we're going to take questions more towards the end. This is a 1-hour webinar, so we'll get to questions at about minute 45. You can raise your hand. You can use the question and answer function. You could use the chat function, and we'll get to you. This webinar is eligible for APA CM AICP credit. The course number was provided on the event flyer. If you don't have it, let me know. This webinar is recorded and it will be posted to the SJV REAP website in a couple of days. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to the AECOM team, which is led by Matthew Gerken out of the Sacramento office. Go ahead, Matthew.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to Robert for heading this up, and thanks for Randy thanks to Randy for your contributions along the way. I'm Matthew Gerken. I'm in AECOM's Sacramento office. Also with us today, we have speakers, AECOM planners from throughout California, Lorena Cordova and Mary Nuristani from our San Diego office, Kevin Borja from our Los Angeles office, and Emily Bureau from our Oakland office, who will be speaking to some of these topics a little bit later in this presentation. Today, we're going to provide an overview of this housing law guide, its contents, and how to use the guide in your day-to-day. After that overview, we're going to summarize some new laws in the key category areas of ADUs and financing, housing elements, and affirmatively furthering fair housing, streamlining and other incentives, and then finally a quick bit about laws from the last session. We understand that the pace of change regarding the legislative framework can be challenging, and that much legislation is in reaction to actions that might be more particular to coastal cities or might otherwise not be directly pertinent for the San Joaquin Valley. We hope that we have created an easy-to-use guide that will demystify some of these recent changes and that can be used as a sort of time-saving cheat sheet for Valley land use professionals. I should mention that this is not meant to be construed as legal advice, and we recommend that you seek legal counsel for any particular legal questions. And now, to provide an overview of this housing laws guide is Lorena Cordova.
Great to be in this space again. The last time we were here was in February earlier this year when we were seeking your input for the creation of the guide. Now we're back and excited to share with all of you the San Joaquin Valley Guide to New Housing Laws. As you can imagine, this was a challenging endeavor to try to make sense of the legislative framework related to housing over the last handful of years. But it was an important undertaking to support you in the work that you do in the Valley communities you serve. And I remember chatting with Matthew in the beginning about this project, wondering how we would bring it to life, and inevitably saying yes, because I'm a glutton for punishment. And now it's finally here. This guide is a collection of efforts shaped by your input and the work of our team members here today. As noted, housing is the focus. So the guide is a collection of housing related laws spanning from 2017 through 2021. The guide includes brief and detailed descriptions of each law. It also includes a prioritization level assigned to each law, which I'll cover in a minute. And the laws are grouped by topic area to make it easy to search. We also included an index to search by bill number, as well as an index to search by subject. I'll note that the survey responses and stakeholder interviews that this group participated in helped to inform the guide. So shout out to the City of Stockton, City of Wasco, and Stanislaus County for taking time to provide some of that input. I should also mention that the guide can be used as a digital copy on your desktop or a hard copy at the public counter. It includes wayfinding in both formats, and it also has active links to use as shortcuts, but also has page numbers to use as you would any other manual or standard book. As Matthew noted, we sought to create an easy to use guide for Valley land use professionals. So our team was very mindful of the layout and organization of the guide from the start. Some key components of the guide organization that I want to note. First, it's organized by topic area. This was one of the things that we heard from survey responders is that the grouping by topics would be super helpful. So those topic areas include ADUs, CEQA, density bonus, fees and funding, housing elements and affirmatively furthering fair housing, parking, streamlining and other incentives, surplus land availability, as well as other miscellaneous laws. And this is illustrated by the topics area wheel in the middle of the slide. Second, there are topic area explanations at the beginning of the guide and at each section to help orient the user. This is shown on the image on the top right of the slide. And third, there's wayfinding throughout with section color coding and icons. And this is illustrated by the wayfinding toolbar at the bottom of the slide. In the spirit of creating this time-saving cheat sheet, as Matthew mentioned earlier, we created two forms for each law. First, the brief law form shown at the top that includes the effective date of the law, the general applicability of subtopic areas. In this example, it is noting it applies to housing elements and residential density and affordability. And it also includes an overview of the law. The second, the detailed law form, which is shown at the bottom, consists of the intent and synopsis of the law, important considerations and key takeaways, and a link to the full legislative text. This was also something that was important to land use professionals in the Valley, having laws in short and long form, and really anything that could make the digesting of laws easier is what we heard. I will also point out that we knew the guide would be used by land use professionals, but that it could be used to share information with other folks, lay people. So we laid out the detailed laws, placing one law to a page to make it easy to print or share the law with, as an example, a member of the public at the counter and or a planning commissioner. Having worked in public sector most of my career, I know the value of having a cheat sheet for current and long range planning needs. So we thought it would be helpful to include a recommended level of action to help jurisdictions prioritize laws. And so each law includes an icon, one of the three that you see on the screen that indicate a prioritization level. Now, the prioritization levels that we created include three. One, ACT, which is the bucket of laws that we needed, that we identified to be implemented now. Prepare, which is the bucket of laws that require preparation of implementing in the near or immediate future. and plan, which is the bucket of laws that we identified to be planned for over the long term. So now we'll move into the portion of the webinar where we'll give you a snip of a handful of laws from the various categories we broke down in the guide. We'll first start with the laws pertaining to ADUs and fees and funding. So I'll hand it over to Mary Noristani to walk you through those.
Thank you, Lorena. So there have been numerous laws enacted in the last couple of years that have removed several restrictions around ADUs in California and have contained measures designed to actively promote construction of ADUs. So I'll go over just a few key laws regarding ADUs from the guide here. First, SB 13 authorizes the creation of ADUs in areas zoned for single-family or multifamily residents. Before this law, it was required that any ordinance adopted by a local agency comply with certain criteria, including requiring that ADUs be either attached to or located within proposed or existing primary dwelling units. However, this law would instead authorize the creation of ADUs up to 1,200 square feet in any area zoned to allow single-family or multifamily residential use. Next is AB 881, which removes owner occupancy requirements for ADUs. Previously, cities had required the owner of the property to live on either the main home or the ADU itself, but AB 881 prohibits this restriction. It also clarifies that garages can be converted into ADUs and requires local agencies to designate areas where ADUs may be permitted based on availability of water and sewer services. And most recently taken into effect, AB 345 requires local agencies to allow ADUs to be sold or conveyed separately from the primary residence to a qualified buyer if certain conditions are met. This law further expands ADU uses and provides flexibility to homeowners. The next category, fees and funding, are laws pertaining to programmatic and administrative fees, streamlining of approval processes related to public funds, and the establishment and authorization of funds for specified programs. We have here is AB 571, which prohibits local governments from charging affordable housing impact fees and are a part of, from charging affordable housing impact fees that are a part of density bonus housing development, including inclusionary housing zoning fees and in lieu fees. This law significantly lowers the cost of housing development, which will allow for more flexibility and affordability. Next, we have, for the first time in history, AB 857, which allows California cities and counties to create their own banks, allowing taxpayers' money to flow back into local communities. Unlike privately owned banks, which are focused solely on private shareholder returns, public banks can leverage their deposits and make loans that benefit the local community. These banks will be able to focus on lending to resolve pressing local needs like affordable housing or small business loans and public infrastructure projects, including rebuilding after wildfire and floods. The law requires a public bank to apply for a banking charter from the California Department of Business Oversight, following all the same financial and regulatory requirements as a commercial bank. Lastly, we have SB 196, which grants a property tax exemption to community land trust-owned affordable housing development projects. The exemption is extended during the construction phase until the homes on community land trusts are sold, with the caveat that the project is not finished on time or stopped, then all excused taxes are retroactively owed. Nevertheless, the law removes the tax burden and frees up funding for more affordable housing. The California legislature has enacted several bills that further reduce local control over the development of ADUs and has further increased incentives and funding for housing development. And ADUs can be an affordable option for residents. They can also increase the pool of for rent and for sale properties, which can assist in regional and state housing goals like RHNA, and kind of a bit of a low-hanging fruit when it comes to affordable housing production as well. The California Department of Housing and Community Development has several available grants currently, approximately $1 billion worth right now that are available. And they have already provided more than $3 billion in funding for development of affordable housing. And in 2021, California produced approximately 19,500 new affordable units. And hopefully in 2022, we'll bring in a higher number of affordable units for communities in California. The next topic, housing elements and affirmatively furthering fair housing, will be discussed by my colleague, Kevin.
Great, thank you, Mary. So new laws have strengthened the requirements when identifying eligible RHNA sites. California State Assembly and Senate passed these laws to combat unintentional overestimation of capacity within local agencies' housing inventories. With more accurate estimations, local agencies can better plan actions that will help them meet their RHNA numbers. So Senate Bill 166 and Assembly Bill 1397 aim to ensure that development opportunities for lower and moderate income households remain available throughout the planning process of the current RHNA cycle, requiring that local agencies make written findings if they allow the development of any parcel with fewer units by income category than identified in the housing element. Additionally, where the approval of a development project results in fewer units by income category than what's identified in the housing element, and the remaining sites in the inventory would not accommodate the jurisdiction's share of the regional housing need, AB 1397 would also require that the jurisdiction identify and make available additional sites. Lastly, Senate Bill 1398 shortened the time that a local agency has when rezoning its inventory sites to accommodate RHNA to 120 days. Now moving on. As land use professionals, we may already be familiar with the concept of affirmatively furthering fair housing, or AFFH. But as a refresher, the concept of AFFH was and continues to be in response to segregated living patterns created by the United States government and military, as well as private development actions that forcibly removed Native Americans from their homelands, restricted federally insured mortgages through racial discrimination, and mid-century urban renewal programs that demolished neighborhoods of color for infrastructure that largely benefited white Americans. AFFH then is defined as taking meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination that overcome these patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities, free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity based on racial characteristics protected by law, such as disability, familial status, national origin, race, religion, and gender and sexual identity. The definition of the origins of AFFH come from the Civil Rights Act of 1968, namely the Fair Housing Act, which requires recipients of federal funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to affirmatively further fair housing through their policies and programs. So in the context of California, the State Assembly introduced an AFFH obligation into law through Assembly Bill 686. It included a requirement for agencies to administer the programs and activities related to housing and community development in a way that affirmatively furthers fair housing and prohibits agencies from taking actions that are inconsistent with that obligation. It also added an AFFH analysis to the housing element beginning in 2021. Assembly Bill 1304 takes that AFFH analysis and clarifies that it must include analyses of available federal, state, and local data and knowledge to identify integration and segregation patterns, and the relationship of sites identified in the inventory to the jurisdiction's duty to affirmatively further fair housing. So to highlight, a number of laws were passed that necessitate additional attention when authoring housing elements. It's important to be aware of these new analyses that need to be taken into consideration when identifying RHNA sites, as well as the new requirements maintaining an inventory of those sites. Notably, in 2021, the first year that required an AFFH analysis within the housing element, many jurisdictions found it difficult to implement. Thankfully, there are resources to help. So in 2021, HCD published a guidance document about developing AFFH analyses. And in 2022, SJV-COG published a webinar about AFFH that can be found on the resources page, which we can share after this webinar. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Emily Biro, who will share more information about recent laws on streamlining and incentives. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be walking us through a few key streamlining and incentive state laws. So when you dig into the guide, you'll see that this section identifies several laws pertaining to streamlining existing processes and by right approvals, clarification of program requirements, and incentives for specific land use configurations. The three laws shown on the screen here essentially facilitate and expedite the construction of housing, and I think an entire presentation could be held on just these three, as they are very detailed and hit on several major points related to speeding up the development process. So to kick us off, Senate Bill 35, which became effective in 2018, aims to increase the housing supply within jurisdictions that have not yet made sufficient progress towards their RHNA, their allocation of the regional housing need. And just a note, several jurisdictions within San Joaquin Valley have not met their RHNA and are subject to SB 35. SB 35 requires streamlined review and approval for eligible housing projects, such as multifamily housing developments and dedicating a certain percentage of affordable housing units. So SB 35 projects would not be subject to CEQA, and the agency would have to ministerially approve the project within 60 days for projects with less than 150 units. Otherwise, they would have 90 days to approve for any larger projects. Now, since 2018, there have been a number of subsequent updates, such as to the preliminary application process and additional eligibility requirements, which you can also find within this housing guide to make sure you're up to date with all the changes. Moving on to Senate Bill 330, also known as the Housing Crisis Act of 2019, significantly changed the way local jurisdictions process housing applications. It had several main components, including faster approvals for housing and zoning changes, limiting ability to downzone unless there's upzoning elsewhere to compensate, prohibiting housing construction moratoriums, while also streamlining reviews and approvals through an established preliminary application process. The preliminary application process allows projects to receive certain vesting rights, such as for zoning, design, and subdivision and fee requirements. So a project would only be subject to the standards adopted and in effect when the preliminary application was submitted. This bill also worked to shorten the development review process by restricting more than 5 public hearings for a project. So overall, this bill really tries to reduce processing time to speed up the building process while also protecting existing units. Finally, Senate Bill 9, which became effective earlier this year and essentially did away with single-family zoning in California. It allows for the ministerial approval of projects that have up to 2 units, such as duplexes, and also lot splits on a single-family zone parcel. So if certain criteria are met, the local agency would have to approve the project ministerially, and the project would not be subject to CEQA. And as we know, previously single-family zone parcels only allowed up to 1 primary unit. But now, under SB 9, homeowners can build 2 homes on each of the 2 new lots. So this allows for a new total of up to 4 units on what previously only allowed 1 primary unit. And this type of development can take on many different shapes in terms of configuration on the existing parcel. Moving on to the next set of key incentive laws, Senate Bill 10, which became effective earlier this year, makes it easier to rezone for smaller developments of up to 10 units on parcels in a transit-rich area or on an urban infill site. A jurisdiction looking to accommodate this through a local ordinance or resolution to amend the general plan or any other adopted local regulation would be exempt from CEQA. Assembly Bill 2162 authorizes supportive housing to be a use that is permitted by right in zones where multifamily and mixed-use development is permitted. So these projects are no longer subject to CEQA and have reduced review timelines. For projects with 50 or fewer units, the local agency would have to review applications within 60 days. Otherwise, for larger projects, they would have up to 120 days to review. Assembly Bill 1783, also known as the Farm Worker Housing Act of 2019, applies to the approval process for certain farm worker housing projects. And these are going to be on projects on land zoned for agricultural uses. So again, these projects are no longer subject to CEQA, and for projects containing less than 50 units, the local agency would have to notify the developer if the project does not meet requirements within 30 days or within 60 days for larger projects. Finally, Assembly Bill 73 also allows local governments to establish by ordinance what they've called housing sustainability districts. Now, these districts have to be located within a half mile of public transit on land that is already substantially developed and can be feasibly developed into residential or mixed use. And again, for housing projects undertaken within these housing sustainability districts would be exempt from CEQA. So to wrap it all up, in summary, what we have been seeing in recent legislation is trending towards boosting and speeding the rate of housing production and construction, increasing density, and overall expediting the approval process to address the ongoing housing crisis. There's also been some great resources out there to further support what legislation is telling us. The Office of Planning and Research, OPR, has published 2 technical advisories on the secret review and streamlining of housing. And additionally, through Senate Bill 2 planning grants, HCD also provides technical assistance to local governments to assist with housing approvals and accelerating housing production. And we will find a way to share these links to both of these resources with you all. With that, I'll now be passing it over to Matthew, who will talk a little bit about what has happened in the latest legislation session.
Thank you, Emily. Another legislative session has wrapped up this fall with several laws that are pertinent, we thought would be pertinent to land use professionals working in the Valley. And while our guide was essentially complete prior to the end of the last session, we actually thought it would be helpful to call out some of these new items as a part of additional content that was added to the guide at the end of our process. So I'd like to provide just a couple of brief summaries on some highlights of that aspect of our guide. First, AB 2536 on development impact fees, capacity fees, connection fees, requires local agencies to show their work a little bit more in making updates to those fees. Cities, counties, and special districts are required now to evaluate and provide evidence that new connection fees and new capacity charges do not exceed the cost of service, presumably the marginal cost of service. This one becomes effective January 1st, 2023. AB 2011, an interesting one, provides streamlined ministerial approval for qualifying multifamily projects on commercially zoned land when such projects agree to pay prevailing wages and when they also meet specified affordable housing targets. One option for affordable housing is 100% below market rate for commercially zoned land, projects on commercially zoned land. Another option under this bill is for mixed income, typically 15% below market rate projects located along commercial corridors as defined in the legislation. Next, SB 6 does not provide a ministerial approval for projects and does not have the below market rate affordable housing requirements, but it does allow residential use on land that's zoned for retail and office without requiring a rezoning. However, this does require both payment of prevailing wages for the ultimate project and also use of skilled and trained workforce requirements, 2 sets of requirements which can substantially increase the construction cost of projects. AB 2097 prohibits agencies from imposing minimum off-street parking requirements on projects. This is only for projects located within 1/2 mile walking distance of a high quality transit corridor or a major transit stop. So this is not a 1/2 mile from any transit, only these certain types of transit. High quality transit corridor has fixed route service during peak times of at least 15-minute headways. Major transit stop is defined as one with rail or bus rapid transit or at the intersection of 2 or more major bus routes that have 15-minute headways or better within during peak commute times. And the last one that I wanted to highlight today is an interesting one, not included in the guide, but I think important for consideration. AB 2234 focuses on post-entitlement permitting. That includes permits for demolition, for grading, building permits, permits for off-site improvements. This bill requires agencies to determine whether an application for post-entitlement permit is complete within 15 business days. Otherwise, the application would be deemed complete. And once the application is deemed complete, local agencies have 30 business days to approve or deny the permit. For housing projects with 25 units or fewer and 60 business days to approve or deny the permit when it relates to projects with 26 housing units or more. There are provisions within this bill that would allow an extension of these time periods if the agency can make findings showing that the post entitlement permit would have an adverse impact on public health or safety. Now I would like to pass the mic back to Michael to facilitate any Q&A and for wrap up.
Sure. Thank you, Matthew. We do have one question in the question and answer box. I don't know if anybody can answer this. Does AB 881 apply to junior ADUs?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I'll take that. So great question. One of the things that we're finding in the ADU and the JDU sections is that they use the terms, interchangeably in the actual bill. With this particular bill, they are making a reference to JDUs. We would always, encourage everybody to sort of check with legal counsel because the interpretation obviously can be different depending on jurisdiction. And there's always an interpretation to be had, I think, with some of the more ambiguous language of the bill. But I would also say that not only is it yes, that it's referenced, and in particular with the constraint about the deeming it complete, it is specifically identified that it's an ADU and a JDU would apply. But one of the things that Mary and I were finding is that, I don't know, I know that you all have had a lot of workshops, that have also been very helpful, I think, in understanding what's going on with housing. I think one of the things that we're also finding is HCD is also kind of not just leaving us out there hanging out there to dry. They're providing a certain amount of support and resources. And this summer, there was an update to the original ADU handbook. And so I would encourage jurisdictions to take a look at that. I know that there was also, workshop through this platform with regards to ADUs earlier in the year. But that handbook is super, super helpful, and it does specifically talk about that legislative bill. And I would say that what we're finding, and Mary, you can chime in if you'd like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we're finding is that wherever you see references to ADUs, there will be references to JDUs. And I think, to err on the side of caution and sort of assume in some instances, obviously check with legal counsel, but assume that, sort of the a more conservative approach is to assume that they're both in the same category. And that's really the sense that I got, because we continue to see ADUs on, each year for the last 5 years, there have been bills associated with ADUs. And so there's some commonalities or some common themes that we've seen threaded throughout, the last 5 years that we were doing our research and analysis and putting together the guide. But I think, ADUs is not one of those topics that that will, cease to exist. I think we'll continue to see it trending, just like density bonus, just like streamlining, just like objective development standards. Did I miss anything, Mary? Do you want to chime in? Anything else that I've missed?
No, you got it.
Cool.
All right, great. Question by Christian Dowd. Does SB 10 require consistency with the general plan in order to be CEQA exempt? Anyone? And you don't have to know the answer. We can get back to folks.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate to, sorry, Emily, just note generally, it would be appropriate as well to have follow-up after this session. Some of these questions are a little bit detailed and it's a little hard to answer on the spot. I think the SB 10 only indirectly addresses general plan consistency, but I think that Emily is wriggling around in her seat, ready to provide an answer.
Emily?
No, thank you, Matthew. Yes, no, that's correct. So the SB 10 would authorize the government to adopt an ordinance to address this up to 10 units. And so to amend the general plan in order to respond to SB 10 would be exempt from CEQA, but definitely further look into this law by legal counsel could definitely address more specific concerns related to this.
Very good. Third question, is an JADU allowed within a garage, or is a JADU only in the existing livable space? Anyone?
Yeah, I would probably note on that again. I would actually defer to the ADU handbook because it really does lend itself to interpretation. I mean, there's so many different pieces of legislative action associated with ADU and JDUs. Just that we've only covered a handful in today's presentation, but there's more in the actual guide. So I would probably defer that to take a look more closely at like comprehensively the ADU handbook.
Yeah, very good. And we do have some more, I'm sure there's some other folks too who can help out in this answering effort, especially the folks who did our ADU work in the Valley. Now, I will say you guys got to try out this guide. It's a very dynamic, very informative guide that was put together. I know we didn't physically go through it here on this webinar, but it's definitely something you should have at your fingertips. And as Lorena suggested, something you should hand out to the public too. There's so much stuff. It's hard to keep track on what's applicable, what's not only from a land use planner perspective, but from somebody in the public wanting to do something with their house or their lot or anything. So I see some relevancy on both sides there.
Yeah, I'll add, sorry, Michael, if I can. I just wanted to note, so in terms of the guide, I think one of the reasons why we would encourage folks to take a look at that is, this is really, when we take a look at, just Council of Governments and how they're supporting their regions, I think this is a great resource for the Valley because it really, there's just been so many action. And I think Kevin, Emily, Mary, and Matthew can all back me up on this. I think we all generally know that the state has been coming at local land use professionals in a number of different ways, obviously prioritizing certain topics. And so the abundance of laws that are coming at land use professionals is really hard to keep track of. And it was hard for us to sort of also dive in to these different topic areas to find what is relevant and what may not be for San Joaquin Valley communities, but then also to try to make sense of it. And when we sort of think about that task, it's like, this is a team of 6, a team of 7. When we think about jurisdictions within the San Joaquin Valley area, we were really thinking this is such a great resource, even if it's just a starting point. If you're one of the jurisdictions that has 25 person department, which I don't know who does, maybe that's just, wishful thinking, but for those jurisdictions who may have only 2 planners or, maybe 10 planners, it's still very challenging to keep up with legislation. And so we're really hoping that this guide, because it is free and accessible and available to everybody through the REAP program, we're really hoping that everybody will take an opportunity to take a look at that, and hopefully it can ease some of the day-to-day of interacting with the public at the counter, or answering some questions from a planning commissioner or city council member, or even just having a starting point to sort of figure out whether it is something that you need to prioritize or not when you're dealing with general plan updates or, public policy items, long range or current planning. So we're really hoping that people will benefit from the guide. We think so, as long as they tap into the resource, but yeah, just wanted to chime in there.
No problem. Panelists, take a look at the other questions. We're going to take a short pivot from the logs of questions and go to Randy, our other panelist, to get his perspective on the presentation today and some key insights or takeaways he might have had. Randy?
Yes, thank you. I do have to call out that my background is primarily in smaller cities that have less than 5 planners. Sometimes some of the cities that I serve, I was the only planner. And so then the idea of being able to use this guide as a resource is critical for you to keep up on this fast moving target. And I can't say enough how useful this guide is. It's something that you can access it through the index areas, which I found extremely helpful. And the reality is that you get these questions at the counter or at a planning commission or a city council meeting, and you can literally make a decent answer by taking just a moment to look up at the index and go to the summary in that referenced page, and then you can find a response. The state legislature has made a big priority. It has made all of our lives more difficult as land use planners. But you know, the goal of all this effort is for more affordable housing, and the vast majority of the jurisdictions that I've been involved in are interested in having more housing available. So it's generally not anything that we should feel as a local land use planner is a threat, or as somehow the state is forcing us to do something that we don't want to do. Yes, I think they are taking away some traditional local land use authority to do this, but I, for one, can live with that. And it is been so difficult for me to keep up with all of these laws. And when this project started, it answered a lot of my questions of how I could keep up with all of these changes at the legislative level. And so it is something, you know, as you're updating your housing element, as we are all in the process of doing that now, we really need to focus in on the section of this guide that talks about housing elements and laws. And then we can see that as we go through this process, there's a lot of things we should be doing. And I think that's a critical way to implement a lot of the requirements is by doing it through our housing element update. I have found that sometimes, depending on if we're doing it locally, the housing element update, we are definitely out of our comfort level. If we're using a consultant, then this is a good way to make sure that the consultant is current on what needs to be required and stated within the housing elements. So this tool gives us a great opportunity to comply with the law and hopefully get to the point where we can have a certified housing element with not a lot of back and forth with HCD.
All right, thank you, Randy. Now we'll go back. We have 3 more questions that are open here. Any one of the panelists want to take a shot at addressing any of these?
So the first one being, do housing projects with 10 units or less need to provide affordable housing or use prevailing wage labor under SB 35?
Yeah, this is not intended to be construed as legal advice. However, there is for 10 units or fewer or public works projects, there's an exemption from the prevailing wage requirement. As far as the affordable housing requirement, that by right component is exactly intended to be tied to certain affordable housing provisions. So I don't see an exemption even for 10 units or fewer from the affordable housing percentage portions of SB 35, but I'll yield to my other panelists if they have a different answer on that one. But for 10 or fewer, the prevailing wage requirement, there is an exemption for that component of SB 35.
Okay, hearing no other comments. does a city have to permit multifamily in a single-family residence zone under SB 35?
I'm happy to take that question. So under SB 35, the project would have to be consistent with the objective zoning and design review standards. So single family zoning, the project would not be applicable if it's multifamily.
Very good, thank you. And then lastly, for the moment at least, ADU laws are constantly changing, but that being said, in your opinion, what are the best ways to access all the new rules in regard to ADUs?
I can take that. The HCD website is a really good resource. They are consistently and constantly updating their links and information, and always provide a good FAQs too, if the new law that passed is complicated or anything like that. And they also add a little red box that says new. So if you're repeatedly going onto the website, you'll just look for that little red box, and it helps a lot.
All right, and this also gives us an opportunity to plug our own ADU product again on the San Joaquin Valley COGS website, where you can find and get in contact with us for technical assistance on ADUs, for a ordinance template, and I think it's up to 4 different plans and elevations for ADUs that are accessible to any planner who asks for it.
Right.
So
Robert's right.
again, that's sjvcogs.org/read.
Yep. It's an
So-
extensive guide, just like this housing guide that was put together for the San Joaquin Valley from the REAP program. So yes, thank you.
So that's all the questions we have at the moment. Are there others? Or if not, I can turn it back over to Michael.
Yeah, I think we're good. I mean, last closing thoughts here is, I think the state has done a good job of sort of allowing so much on the planning side, and let's just wait to see if the market responds and picks up with it. I mean, you have the whole conversion of commercial space to housing, you have the ADU and the lot splits and everything there, then others streamlining things. So I'd be interested to see where the valley ends up as it relates to other parts of the state and catching up and using those provisions. So with that, if there's no other questions, look for our next workshop in February, subject to be determined. We have 2 more questions. Hold on. Thank you. Very informative.
It's understood that both ADU and JADU may be constructed in single-family residential zones. However, it's not entirely clear whether more than one ADU detached may also be permitted.
Yeah, that's a trick question. I think if you had a lot split, you could probably get 2 in there, but I'll let the panelists
So
chime in.
from what I recall, you can have both a JADU and an ADU on the same lot.
Right.
I think HCD has a frequently asked question FAQ on this, which I can provide a more detailed answer on that.
Okay, very good. Thank you, panelists. Thank you so much for the guide. Everyone, I sent the link in the chat box. Go ahead and access it and use it, please. And we'll see everyone shortly. Have a great holiday season.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thanks,
for coming.
everybody.
Take care.